in order to listen to Professor Clark Kellogg about design thinking during Design Thinking Week 2015. Professor is going to talk today about the design thinking workshops and projects, results, implementation, and we are looking forward to hear all the things that you have to tell us. Yes, Professor Clark Kellogg works at Berkeley University. He is a professor at MBA, and he teaches innovation and design thinking. He's also one of the most favorite students at Haas School of Business, and has more than 30 years of experience in design thinking and design strategy. Welcome, Professor, and we are lucky to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna. I'm delighted to be back again. Last time we spoke, we were talking about empathy in the design thinking process and the importance of empathy as a way to understand users and, more importantly, their unmet needs. And that platform of understanding is what launches us into ideation and experimentation and implementation. And implementation is what we're going to be talking about today. This is a screen grab from Joanna's talk earlier in the week. And so on Wednesday, we were talking about the empathy component, the blue heart. Today, we're talking about the orange boxes, the prototyping, and the red ruler, the testing. I have some essential frameworks that I want to talk about, and we'll talk a little bit about techniques and tools as well. And I want to leave lots of time at the end for conversation with you. The first idea that I want to explore is that we tend to think inside the box, to coin the cliche, quite a bit when it comes to the implementation phase. Most of the time, and I am as good at thinking inside the box as anybody within earshot of my voice today. It's very difficult for us to think differently or to think beyond our own preconceptions and our own belief in an idea. The real essential skill that we're going to talk about today is how do we get beyond our own thinking. One quote that I want to share with you, it's on the screen now. Nothing will ever be attempted if all possible objections must first be overcome. And this leads us into the major framing around the implementation piece of our work. So often, when a new idea is proposed or is surfaced, the first thing we hear are all the objections, all the reasons why it won't work. And the implementation phase is a period in which we look at those, quote, objections, those assumptions, and we begin to test them, and we learn about them, and we iterate or improve our product. This can be said, the quote is said actually better in this photograph. If you never try, you'll never know. And this sets up our conversation about tools and techniques for trying and knowing. Because the fact is, we rarely know the end state of an idea when we're first working with it, when we're first setting about to implement it. And so I realized that often in my work, I hit a brick wall when all I really need to do is fly through that window. And the way I fly through the window, the way you fly through the window, the way we all fly through that window into the blue sky is to try some things, to experiment, to test, and learn our way forward into full implementation. last time I shared with you this idea that this work is largely living outside our comfort zone. And our work in testing and implementing is, at least for me, really challenging. There's some reasons that I will mention in a few minutes about why that's the case. But the fact is that the work of implementation is largely outside of our comfort zone, just as all of the innovation process feels like it's not our at-rest state, because it isn't. We'd have to move ourselves to a different mindset, a different willingness to be, a different willingness to not know the answer. The magic spot is to leave our comfort zone, roll up our sleeves, and do the hard work of innovation. Before we jump into that, I want to share with you a few resources and tools. You may know these books. They are, for me, the three books that frame in so much of the innovation process. You may well be familiar with Business Model Generation. It's the single most popular business book of the last decade. The book on the right of the screen, Interviewing Users by Stephen Portugal, is very germane to our talk about empathy and finding user needs. Interviewing Users is a book that goes through a step-by-step process, both of insight and of technique. Stephen Portugal lives here in San Francisco. He's the most curious man I've ever met. And his book is a field guide to understanding users. And the last book I want to share with you, the one on the left, called Little Bets. Little Bets is by a man named Peter Sims. And it's, if you haven't read it, it's thin. And it is a compilation of wonderful stories of people experimenting their way to full implementation, taking little bets, experimenting with an idea, seeing what happens, then integrating that learning into the next iteration, to the next experiment. And so it goes. It's like a sailboat tacking in the wind. I don't know how many of you are sailors, but tacking into the wind and get closer and closer to the destination. At first, we're taking long learning loops. And as we learn more and more and more, we get closer and closer to that full implementation step. So that's books. The next slide I'm going to show you is about some ideas. And we've spoken about most of these, but in this case, it's a t-shirt. And it's a t-shirt on the back of a shirt that is came from the Nordstrom Innovation Lab. Here in the US, Nordstrom is a major department store, legendary for its customer service. But this is their innovation lab. And here are the practices that they employ. A bias toward action. In other words, go do it and see what happens. The next, fail forward fast. A similar idea. What it also needs to have on there is fail forward fast and learn from it. The third is show, don't tell. This is talking about prototyping and testing. The fourth was our topic on Wednesday, practice empathy. The fifth, build to think. This is a prototyping idea. Make it and try it. Yes, and is a mental state of mind around ideation and evaluation. And the last one, similar to our ideas of diverge and converge. This is the same thing. It says flare, then focus. And all of these principles we will talk about and are useful in the implementation phase of any innovation project. Whether, by the way, it's a physical object or a policy or a social innovation. So let me get to the heart of our story, which is testing ideas to implement ideas. Now, at the heart of this is something that is true for all of us. Well, it's certainly true for me. I think I know more than I do about anything I'm working on. And that bias, that almost set of blinders, can make us oblivious to the things that we're not seeing in an implementation phase, in a product, in a service, in a social innovation, in an organization. One of the most powerful tools that we have in doing this kind of work is the narrative or the telling of stories. And I want to talk about two major items in our time together. The first one is stories, and the second one is prototyping. So let me jump in. First, to talk about stories. Stories have immense value to effect change. You know this in the history of your country and in the history of my country. In the history of companies and of social movements, the same rules apply. I needn't go into these 5 areas, except for one, facilitating unlearning. So much of implementing an idea, particularly an innovative idea, as opposed to a quality improvement or a policy change. So much of implementing an innovative idea is to facilitate the unlearning of our users, of our investors, of our customers. Because we're creating never before seen work. And so people have to have room for that idea to root in their imaginations. And stories are a terrific way to do that. We do know something about making stories because we have been learning from a company called Pixar. You know Pixar's films. This is their studio not far from here, a few miles away in Emeryville, California. Pixar takes about 4 years to make a film. Their latest Inside Out or their first Toy Story, they all take about the same amount of time to create. Of those 4 years, they spend 1 year making the digital version of the movie. The other 3 years, they're working on the story. They're crafting it. The image on the top right, the color storyboards, are about the emotion of the film. The bottom right, the black and white, beautiful black and white sketches, are about the action in the film. And you'll see those are created with, they're hung on the wall with push pins. And the storytellers at Pixar move these sketches around for 3 years until they get the story just right. And the elements they're working with are tone, personality, sequence, the shape of the story, the emotions of the story. All of the things that make those films, those stories, so endearing to us. It's why I always end up weeping at a Pixar film, because they encapsulate the human spirit so well. And we can learn a lot about that when we start to craft innovation stories. Because here's a truism. People buy with emotion and justify with fact. So an innovation story has to let us buy with our emotions and then cognitively justify it or make sense out of it. My colleague here at Haas, David Reamer, says this delightfully. In order to tell a great story, you have to have a great story. So I want to move now quickly into the idea of experience, imagination, prototyping, and the telling of stories. Our first example is the difference between imagining and experiencing. Here in this slide, a text slide, I'm going to read you this description. And you can imagine this idea. Imagine a small device that sits on a table or nightstand in your home that is connected to your doctor's office by a normal phone line. Throughout the day, it prompts you to answer a short list of easy-to-understand questions by simply pushing buttons to indicate your response. The interaction with the device is easy and relies on only 4 buttons. The questions asked use straightforward language, and the options for responding are clear. The doctor's office is given frequent reports about how the questions have been answered, and any abnormalities or worrying trends are flagged so that the doctor can call the patient or the caregiver before anything becomes a real problem. Now, like me, you can imagine this device. This is a static picture that relies on our brains converting this language to a picture. But what if we experienced it instead? It might look like this. This is a project from our friends at IDEO. And here is the device we just imagined. Here's your grandma and mine sitting at some prototypes of the 4-button device with the simple language. And the screen there in the middle is recording her answers and demonstrating the experience on the other end in the doctor or the caregiver's office. This is a dynamic experience of watching a user over time, understanding what works for her and what doesn't work for her. And this experiment took place maybe 3 months into the product development cycle at IDEO. They'd gotten far enough that they started to do prototyping to understand how this device would work or maybe wouldn't work. Because in prototyping and experimenting implementation, learning what doesn't work is as valuable as learning what does work. Here is a picture of a prototype. And if I ask you, what is this? You might say it's a dry marker taped to a spray paint can affixed to a clothesline clip. You would be right. If I ask you, what does it remind you of? You might say, a gun. And you would be right. Let me tell you the story of this object. I was at IDEO one day. We were part of a group that was working on a medical device. A medical device used by surgeons and by dentists to, as a suction device to suck saliva or blood out of a wound site, and to do it with more control than current products on the market. One of the engineers, a man named John, had an aha moment. He said, "I've got it. It could be like a gun." And one of the people in the room looked at him and said, "Oh, John, we don't put guns in our mouths," referring to the dental suction function. John was furious at this comment. He was so mad, he stood up and he walked out of the room and slammed the door behind him. You can imagine the awkward moment in that room. Actually, it was an awkward minute, because about a minute later, John came back into the room with this object in his hand, and he tossed it on the table, and he said, "This is what I'm talking about." The woman who had commented earlier, I'm telling you the truth here, said, "Oh, John, why didn't you say so?" But the rapid prototype, the experience of this object, got the work back on track and ultimately led to the successful deployment and marketplace success of this device. It is an easy-to-control suction device. The suction is controlled by the twisting of the thumb and forefinger. It's held in the hand with the thumb, as you see. And when you look at it, you sort of think, it looks a little bit like a gun. The story here, the point of this story is a rapid prototype can burst through our preconceptions around language and social norms. You know, it's a good thing we don't like guns in mouth. That's not the point. The point is that the words set up a barrier, and the prototype broke through it. And this medical device would not exist if the group had simply listened to Mary and said, oh, no, we can't go there. So our lesson number 1 is about the use of rapid prototypes. They should be rough, they should be fast, and they should be relevant or asking a pertinent question. When we say rough, we mean unfinished. There's room for imagination and co-creation in the rough prototype. It should be fast for lots of reasons. Fast on its own is good because we're trying to get to market quickly. But fast and inexpensive are also important because if you can learn quickly at low cost, what's not to like about that? Of course, that's a desirable state. And a finished prototype of anything, whether it's a product or a company or a policy or a social innovation, a prototype that is too finished or too polished doesn't let people get access to it. The human tendency is, oh my gosh, that is so beautiful. They've worked so hard. It would be rude of me to be critical of it. That's just human behavior. So for all kinds of reasons, we like to use rapid prototypes that are fast and inexpensive. Here's another example of a prototype, a rapid prototype to test an idea. Now, this was a company about 5 years ago wanting to go into the vending machine business of high-quality fresh brewed coffee. They went to a food machinery company and asked them how much it would cost to prototype their machine. The answer was 950 euros, or about 900,000 US dollars. That was a lot of money. So instead, they went to what you see in the picture. Now, in the prototype, in the actual test, you could not see through here. It was a solid panel. But in fact, you put your money into the front, and a person inside that booth would furiously be brewing fresh coffee and click, 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 and the thing would come around as if it were, and dispense to you, as if it were a machine. And once the person grabbed the coffee and had a sip, a human intercept would take place, and they'd be interviewed about the quality and the value of this coffee. And it turned out that people didn't think it was worth it. And the project was abandoned. This was just about the time that the Keurig cups were coming into the market, and of course they gained, at least every place I've been, large market share. So this idea would have cost almost €1 million to test in its full form. But instead, in this example and in this prototype form, this company learned a marvelous thing. They learned not to invest in a line extension that would have cost them tens of millions of dollars and netted no market share. So they saved all that money, but they saved 920,000 euros or $900,000 on the experiment. They were delighted that they learned that this stuff doesn't work. So an important idea here is in implementation that what you learn from failure is every bit as useful as what you learn from success. And it's often more important in understanding how a product or a service will meet the consumer or the marketplace. Let me talk about some more other forms of prototyping. It can be a journey map, a simple depiction of an experience through time from point A to point B. It can be a 3D printed object. Now this is running counter to what I just said, isn't it, about rough prototyping. But 3D printers are becoming so ubiquitous, you will all soon have one in your kitchen or in your office 5 or 10 years. And you'll be able to make beautiful things like this, beautiful prototypes. We're doing some experiments now with a clothing company, testing whether they have a business possibility of installing 3D printers in customers' locations and then simply printing their clothes. So we know 3D printers are going to force big changes and opportunities into the market. Our willingness to engage with a beautifully crafted 3D printed prototype will change how we behave around objects like this. So that's a stay tuned idea. Prototypes can also be business model canvases. Prototypes can come in so many forms. They're all tests of an intended future. And in all of these tests, there are hypotheses that we can check on, test around, and learn from. I'm going to show you 3 slides now from a TED Talk by Tom Chu. Tom was involved, worked at Google, and he was involved in the Google Glass project. And in his talk, he talks about 3 prototyping rules. The first one is find the quickest path to experience. Now this, by the way, the sketch, sheet protector, coat hanger, plexiglass, Pico projector, and netbook, was the first sketch of the first prototype of Google Glass. The second prototyping rule is doing is the best kind of thinking. That's very true, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. But here on the screen, look at these sketches. This was the first prototype of the motion commands that Google Glass uses. The first prototype of Google Glass was created in about half a day. The second prototype in about 45 minutes. The whole project, when the technical pieces came in, took longer, of course. Here's the third rule of prototyping. And I think this one is really important. Use materials that move at the speed of thought. So that says, use whatever you've got, make them cheap, make them fast, make them malleable, so that you can bring your ideas to life at the speed of your thinking, not at the slow, laborious speed of a prototyping company or someone else making something as you wait around. Now this project, as I mentioned, led up to the successful prototype and now marketplace existence of Google Glass. I don't know if you've used Google Glass. It's an idea that may come back, but Google has actually abandoned it right now because it didn't take in the marketplace. But the prototyping lessons from this exercise are really important. And to sum up the prototyping piece, we use these prototypes in the implementation phase to test 3 things. To test if our product or service is inspiring and engaging, to test how we might evolve and improve the ideas, iterate them, or to validate, yes, that's a good idea. It's such a good idea, I want to invest in it. So these are the primary functions of prototypes, of rapid prototypes, and of second and third stage prototypes as well. Ways of learning and testing and improving. Now I want to shift over and talk about the stories we tell with our prototypes. And here, I want to postulate, I want to have you believe this for a moment, that a story, a narrative story, a novel, a TV show, a movie, has these elements to it, listed on the left of the screen. The protagonist, the motivation, the conflict, etc. I apologize, the type has reset a little bit on this slide. When we map them to an innovation story, all of these same functions remain. We call them something different. But their function in the story is the same thing. Now, what about the story? What makes a good story? Well, everyone knows the story that's on the screen. And whether it's a story of the Big Bad Wolf or Cinderella or Sinbad or something, a Polish folk character, it doesn't matter. You know the story. It starts out once upon a time in a land that was green and lovely. Every day people woke up and they were happy. The children were healthy. There's abundance in the land. And then one day, something bad happens. The sky is filled with black locust insects. They descended upon the valley. They ate all the food. The children were dying. The men and women were despairing. They didn't know what to do. Because of that, life began to drain out of the lovely green valley. Until finally, a hero rides over the hill, drives away the locusts, changes the landscape, and ever since that day, they have lived happily ever after. You know this story. Every person on earth knows this story because it's a classic story of every culture. So what if we took that story, which we all know and love, and turned it into a framework for innovation stories? And it looks like this. Things are in a balance. Something comes along to unbalance them. There's a quest for a resolution, and a new balance is established. So let's just look at this in marketplace terms. There's an existing market segment and product category. A disruptive technology emerges and takes that market out of balance. With that disruptive technology, people begin to find new ways to seize market opportunity or seize social change. And as they find a new solution and implement it, a new balance is established. And so we no longer need to go to the corner bookstore, hoping they might have the hard copy book, order it and wait a month. Let's just go to Amazon, or let's just look it up on our Kindle. There are lots of examples like this. But this classic story spine allows us to use a story framework and shape of the story that everyone knows, and it's perfectly suited to telling an innovation story of change. This next slide, so I just want to pause there and say that this idea of using what people know, crafting it to be in a framework that people love, and telling a story of change focused around the innovation that we're looking to implement is a fabulous, inexpensive art form that allows people to co-create with you, to enlist their support, and to realize the benefits of what you're doing. Now, you all probably recognize this poster. It's the most successful marketing campaign of the century. Of course, it's the Apple iPod, which was introduced in 2003 or 2005. This image was everywhere, wasn't it? And when you think about that era, there were 103 MP3 players already on the market. Why did I rush out to buy this one? Partly it was because I wanted to get one before my teenage kids did and be cool. But also because I looked at those images. And here's what's going on. This isn't about the technical capability of an MP3 player, the amount of songs you can store. No, it's a story about how you feel. A young, hip, young man or a woman, I think this is a woman, dancing, having fun, being cool, loving the music, all with this wonderful white earbud device. So I ran out and got one. Gosh, you get one of these, you can be younger, hipper, cool, you can dance. It didn't make me younger, hipper, cooler, and I couldn't dance any better. But I felt cool, and it felt great. And every time in that era that I would see somebody wearing the white earbuds and carrying the iPod, I thought, wow, we're part of the same cool club. In 2008, after the financial collapse, my firm was asked to go to Detroit, Michigan, an American city that had been particularly hard hit by the recession. We were asked to research why so many young African American men were not going to school, 83%. And we were doing street intercepts. We would see someone walking down the street. If it was a young African American man of high school age and it was 2 in the afternoon, he was not in school. So we would simply ask them to talk to us and interview them, user needs, empathy. And one of these occasions, a young man was walking toward me with the white earbuds in. And I thought, wow, he's cool, like me. So I asked him if he would talk to us, and he said yes. To make small talk, I said, well, what are you listening to? And he sheepishly reached down into his pocket, and he pulled out the end of the earbuds. And it wasn't connected to anything. And he looked at me and he said, I just wanted to look cool. And I thought to myself, wow, I'm 60 years old. I'm a white professor from Berkeley, California, And here's a 17-year-old African-American high school dropout from Detroit, and we have something in common? We both wanted to be cool. And so this idea of companies that build features and customers that seek benefits, and the stories, the innovation stories, connect the two. I still don't know how many songs an iPod can play, even the one incorporated into my iPhone. All I know is it works and it's cool, and therefore I want it. So this idea that stories can drive imagination and marketplace behavior is a critical link in our implementation saga. Now, just a pause to let you have a chance to breathe and reset, and then I'm going to move forward with a few more ideas before we turn it over to question and answer. So if you are thinking of, you have things you want to ask about and talk about, we'll get to those in just a few more minutes. One of the challenges of storytelling, of innovation storytelling, as we test our assumptions and move closer and closer to full implementation, is getting the story clear and getting our own thinking clear. And so this lovely quote, attributed to almost every writer around, is, "I would have written you a short letter, but I didn't have the time." Isn't that true? It takes time to create things shorter, smaller, more compact. We call this getting to essence. And when we get to that distilled essence of a story, we know we're there because there's nothing extraneous in it. This is the story of a brand of kitchen tools, cooking tools, called OXO Good Grip. You may know them. Most people in the US have one of these in their kitchen, one of the other, a pizza cutter, a garlic press, scissors, Peter, whatever. The way these came about was a retired CEO of a pots and pans company called Farberware was married to his wife, Betsy, and Betsy loved to cook. But Betsy had very painful arthritis developing in her hands and hurt her to hold the little thin-handled kitchen tool. And so here's the distilled story of how OXO Good Grips were invented. Betsy loved to cook, but it hurt. So Sam asked, "Why do ordinary kitchen tools have to hurt your hands? Why can't there be wonderfully comfortable tools that are easy to use?" OXO Good Grips. Now I share this story with you because it is such a common object that was tested in a very extreme way, arthritic hands. But I don't have arthritis. No one in my family does, but we all use OXO Good Grips. And this leads us to an important implementation strategy, is that we often find needs in the extreme case, like Betsy. And we solve for that extreme design challenge. And then we test at the mean, or the larger segment of society, or user group. And the reason that this is effective is that at the big middle, we can't really see the extreme case that opens up the design opportunity, the clarified user need. So at the extremes, at the sides of that bell curve, are most often where we find, where we're able to see user need and solve those user needs, and then come back and implement it in the larger segment of the society, the user group, the company, whatever it might be. I hope that's a clear idea, because it's an important one. So we've talked about the power of prototypes, we've talked about the power of stories, and all of these are in service to trying ideas, testing them, learning from them, plowing that learning into the product, testing it again, learning from that, and again and again and again. Virtually every product that is successful in the marketplace, virtually every social innovation that is successful in the marketplace, has become that way because the people working on it test and learn and adjust. Create and adjust. Create and adjust. I want to close with 6 ideas, 6 principles that frame in this notion of implementation. And we have a nascent knowledge at this point based on the little time we've had today. But I hope that these ideas will form a seed to germinate new thoughts and experiments for you by going out and doing some things. So here is the first idea, which is to learn by doing. You remember when you rode a bicycle, when you learned how to ride a bicycle? You didn't read a manual and go out and jump on your bike and ride away. No, no, no. Your grandpa, your mom, your dad, your brother, your uncle, your friend was holding the back of the bike, and you'd run, you'd walk, you'd move forward a little bit and fall off. And what did they say? Go back into the house and watch TV, you'll never know how to ride a bike? No, of course not. They said, get up and try it again. And repeatedly, you fall and get up and go further and get up. And we learn by doing. This is how all products and services and ideas get implemented. The second is something that I talk about all the time with our students, and I say to myself, which is trust the process, do the work. There's so much power in simply doing the work and getting out of the way of the work. Which leads me to the third idea, which is beware of idea infatuation. What does this mean? It means that as an originator of an idea, or even someone who's gotten on board with an idea, the more powerfully we believe in it, the more dangerous it can become. Because, and I've done this more times than I want to admit, when I really believe in something I've designed or an idea I have, I don't see anything wrong with it. It's virtually perfect. I'm so infatuated with my idea. And it is then that I stop being curious, that I stop testing, that I stop listening, that I stop caring about other people. So I end up with a product, in this case, that's perfect for a market of one. But because I love it so much, I haven't bothered to pay attention to anybody else. And therefore, it falls short. Make sense? Here's another idea, and one that we talked about on Wednesday, that curiosity is better than judgment. When we're testing and implementing, our job is not to reject all claims of improvement or what doesn't work. It is to be curious and listen and appreciate people's response to our ideas, to our products, or to our innovation, our social innovations. Always being more curious is never a bad thing, ever, in any part of our lives, for that matter. I have 2 more ideas that I would like to share with you before we open for questions. And this goes to innovation and implementation. That there's opportunity in everything. But we have to implement, we have to test these ideas to find that opportunity. I could tell you, and you could tell me, dozens of stories of products or services or ideas that were intended for something else, but they found a usefulness through people trying things out. Some of the more famous ones are Velcro. That was the irritant of a man walking through a field and finding the weeds sticking to his socks. Made him mad. And then the light bulb went on. Viagra, erectile dysfunction drugs, were originally designed as heart medication. But they had this other wonderful side benefit that nobody knew about. Of course, it created an entirely new segment of drugs and of users. I don't know if you have in Poland the spray-on lubricant that is used by handy people, to fix hinges and whatnot. It's called WD-40. The reason it's called WD-40 is that 39, 38, 37, 36, on down to 1 didn't work. They tested their way into usefulness, and it was the 40th time that they formulated the oil that it finally began to work, so they called it WD-40. This notion of learning our way forward in implementation is so very important. And the last idea to share with you is that as you begin these journeys of implementation, know before you begin what success looks like. What would it be like if this was fully implemented and successful in this segment, in this user group, in this need state, whether it's social innovation or product innovation? And when you know what that looks like, then you can set about to learn your way into it. The important idea here is that if you don't know where you're going, then it doesn't matter what path you take. But if you do know, then you can navigate your way through implementation testing to get to the spot, that recognizable spot, where you have predefined what success will be like. So you know how to get there, and you know when you've arrived. Every product or service or social innovation looks the way at implementation that people thought it would. But that's less the point than having a picture of what that is, so that you have direction and you have focus and purpose. And if you learn along the way, like Velcro, like Viagra, like WD-40, like a million other things, and you change your direction and your goal, you're doing that consciously. You're not just floundering around. You're on purpose and you're on point. I'm going to end there with the formal remarks because I have probably overwhelmed you with lots of ideas. And Joanna, I'd like to open things up to questions, should there be any. And we can spend the rest of our time, when we have ample time, to have conversation.
Good morning, Professor. Here's Gosha. And John, I have some problems with her connection, so I'm here. And
All right,
are there any questions, guys? I cannot see any.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
we can wait a moment to see if people are typing.
I guess so. They need maybe some time. Well.
And while that's going on, I will mention that some of the visual images, in fact, the one that's on the screen now, were created by me over a period of a year where I did a piece of art every day of the year 2013 called the 365 Art a Day Project. And it was a marvelous journey of spending each day creating a piece of work. And some of these are on the screen. Probably the thing I'm most proud about over the many years I've been doing creative work. Up on the chat line. Not a question. It was just a quick thank you and a goodbye. Well, then goodbye.
Yeah.
And thank you.
Well, there is no question. There is just a goodbye, and I cannot see anything more.
Yes,
so
that was kind.
Right.
Well, then we can close out if we're done. And if you need to stay on a bit for other questions or a conversation with you, happy to do that. You tell me what our next step might be.
Well, I guess we can wait a little, just like 2 minutes more. If anybody wants to check his English, you can write in Polish also. I will try to translate. And
perfect.
Yeah, so we can wait. So to answer your question, we have WD-40 in Poland.
Oh, good. It's one of my favorite innovation stories, and not every place recognizes it. So I always wonder if that story will make any sense to people.
Yeah, for me it does. That was good to know, the story about 40.
Yeah.
Well,
one of the innovations that should happen with that product is the little red straw that comes with it, taped to the side of the can, and you put it into the nozzle so you can point it. Of course, that straw that little red straw always gets lost, and the product usefulness is restricted because of that. That's another innovation opportunity for that company.
Yeah, well, good point. Well, I'm not using it, but by my own. I have some people to do it for me. It's not my problem actually, but well, yeah, that's the way to do the thing. Well, we have no question anymore, so I'm really, really glad that you were with us for this 1 hour. And thank you for everything. It was really nice to have you here and listen all of these nice and interesting stories. I hope, like, I know that it will help me. It's really inspiring me. So, well, thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, and have a good weekend.
Thanks a lot. The same to you. Bye.
Bye-bye.